I'm Scott Carpenter. I've been doing Sasquatch research now for a couple of decades. Got started in around 2008. I had a chance encounter and had heard did a half-hearted whoop on the lake and got a response, which was a shocker. And then whatever made the whoop came down to the lakeshore, raised cane, and left me kind of in shock and kind of wondering what in the world was going on. So a week later, I go back into the area on foot, look around, and the rest is kind of history. That's kind of started me off in my quest to try to figure out what a Sasquatch was. And my first goal was just to get it on video and kind of for myself figure out what it was. And then as time went on and things started happening, I reached out to you and we started a friendship, a relationship, joined NABS and started working on the DNA study, and the rest is history.
And how many books have you written, Scott?
Yeah, I guess I got to count. Seven now. It's hard to believe.
About Bigfoot.
About Bigfoot.
And where is the center point of your research?
It's the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, most of it, and then I've got an area on public land, so that I kind of go between the two.
And when Dr. Ketchum started the DNA study and we approached you, what did you think of that?
I was excited. I was very excited because, I was beginning to learn things myself and having these weird experiences and odd experiences, and I was trying to figure out what they were, and the opportunity to actually, be able to try to get some DNA, some hair or some other type of DNA and get it submitted and find out what we're dealing with was very exciting.
One of the questions that people always approach me with is, how did you get the DNA? So can you explain to the audience how we came up with the tape concept?
Sure. So early in the DNA study, they learned that they couldn't get the mitochondrial DNA from just the hair shaft alone. And you reached out to me and said, man, when we get hairs, we've got to get the hair tat or the follicle with it. And we got to figure out a way. So we started thinking about it, and we needed a way to pull the hair out, with the hair follicle intact and get them to voluntarily do that. I mean, at first I came up with a thing where they would stick their hand in and scratch their arm, and that stuff like that was just, a little bit over the top and didn't want to like injure them. And so just kind of me and you brainstorming together, we kind of came up with the idea to take the packing tape, because it's extremely sticky, and wrap it sticky side out near or on the near the bait. So like we started this in the wintertime, and I was trying to think, what in the world could I use that would really attract the Bigfoot? And we'd always kidded about slapping bacon on grease on people's backs and send them in the woods as bait, and so that's what I thought got on. I said, let's try some bacon grease. And so I fried some bacon, got the grease, and so I went out to a place I'd established a feeding station. That's where I would take gifts or take food to them and try to interact with them. And I took the bacon grease, and as far up as I could reach, I actually just packed it into the bark. And then I took the tape, probably right under the bacon grease and probably about 5 foot level. So you had tape at somewhere around 5 to 6 feet and about 8 feet. And just started doing it that way, and then began to get results. Began to get they would lean up against a tree, lick the bacon grease out of the bark, as crazy as it sounds, and I'd get they pull chest hair or they pull belly hair out, and we were able to get viable samples that passed the screening with Mr. Spence and got tested into the study.
So people will say, well, that's great, you attracted them to the tree and to the bacon grease. Why didn't you just put up a trail camera and photograph that happening?
Well, the trail camera is is a repellent for them. I found out early on that they can recognize technology, and they actually know what it's doing, and they know how to defeat it. That was one of the amazing things to me early on. I thought it was a dumb bipedal ape, and so I literally would put like food out, like an apple or a candy bar, and I literally would have cameras very, very close, just looking right at it. And they were very smart. I would have footage of basically what would happen. They knew that if they stepped in front of the camera would go off once, and if they stayed in front of the camera, it's a passive infrared, so it's looking for that change. If there's no change, then that's the new norm. And so what I'd have is I'd have a perfect thing, photograph of my little bait station. The camera would go off and it'd white out. And then, 10, 15 minutes later, it'd go off again. And when it would go off again, all the food would be gone. So they literally learned how to defeat those cameras like that. So I knew better than to try to put one up. So as soon as I put cameras near the food or near what I was doing, activity would completely stop. It was almost best to go as low tech as possible. That's where I came up with using black thread across the trees to see if they'd entered the area. And the black thread, still to this day works perfectly. You just take this regular black thread about 8 to 9 feet up and go around the area. And then if it's, it's not 100%, but usually if it's broken, the only thing that can break it in that area is either a limb falling or, something tall enough and big enough. And especially in East Tennessee, there's only one thing I know of that can break thread at 9 feet.
So what do you think that they are seeing in the technology that allows them to understand it's there?
Well, I'm positive personally that they can see the infrared, and the passive infrared sensor is always scanning, so they can see that all the time. And I think they have a way to, and I can't explain how, but they know when human technology is around, and it's uncanny because it's people hide them. I've hidden them. I've literally hauled out tree stumps and hidden them inside the tree stumps. And I've actually used what's called a plot watcher, and that's a camera that doesn't even have an infrared at all. All it does is you set it and it snaps a picture every so many seconds. And they still wrap, and I had it wrapped, I literally wrapped it in bark, put it on a tree, totally camel. The only thing sticking out was the lens. And it was taken, like I said, it's by like 1 every 5 seconds. And a Sasquatch approached it and he snuck up, and the picture I have of the Sasquatch is where he's leaning around the tree looking at the camera. So, out of probably curiosity, but they even, found that camera. So I think it's more than just the infrared. There's something that somehow they detect our technology, or as some people think it may be as simple as they're watching us when we put it up. But I think they are able to recognize it. If they see it, they're able to recognize that's technology and they need to avoid it. It's just like with my house. If someone brought something foreign into my house and set it on the chair and I walked in the room, I know, hey, that doesn't belong here. And I think that too is similar to their situation.
So when you first got into research and looking into the topic of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, did you think it was just another dumb animal in the woods?
Yeah. At first, because like everybody else, I start Googling, start trying to look it up, look for books, and everybody goes to the big names, and everybody, the first thing you see is, it's some sort of, relic hominid or some sort of large ape. And so you're thinking you're dealing mostly with an animal, maybe some sort of human throwback that's not very smart. It's a caveman or it's a big ape. And so that's what I thought I was dealing with. That's why I really didn't have any respect for its intelligence when I first started. Just literally putting the cameras and just thinking it's going to be like a deer or any other animal. It's hungry. It's going to just move right in there, grab the apple, and I'm going to get a really good picture of it. And found out real fast that's not what they are, and there's so much more intelligence than we give them credit for.
And how long did it take you to have that epiphany that it's something different?
Probably about 18 months to 2 years.
And that flew in the face of the conventional longtime researchers.
Big time.
And did you get any blowback from that?
Oh, immediately. As soon as I started, I got a small following, not a large one, but a small one. And as soon as I started saying, I don't think this thing's a dumb animal. I don't think it's an ape. By then I'd had an encounter where I'd seen its face, and it was a human. It was a human. The face was not apish. It looked like a hair-covered man. And so, yeah, some people greeted me very negatively. The old school really kind of got angry, but some of the people who had been experiencers who had actually seen them themselves, yeah, they gravitated towards me because they're like, yeah, that's what I saw. I wish I had a dime for every time someone wrote me an email and said, that you posted, that's exactly what I saw, And so those gravitated toward me. The old guard, they started distancing themselves from me.
So some of that old guard are very highly educated people from the collegiate arena.
Hmm.
How can they not recognize what we see?
Now, this is my opinion, but I think they do. I just think they just kind of in their mind set it aside and ignore it. I think that they've been given the parameters, if, from the institutions. If you say Sasquatch is some sort of bipedal ape, then we'll continue to let you have tenure. We'll continue to let you teach about it and write your books about it. But if you go over into it's a human hybrid, there may be supernatural things attached to it, then we're going to cut you off. And so rightly they make a decision where they're going to go. And unfortunately, many of them, they want to keep their careers, they want to keep the money flowing, and so they continue to, they just basically ignore it. They know it, they just ignore it, and can continue to insinuate that it's some sort of physical being, 100%. It's some sort of bipedal ape, and that's as far as they'll go.
So how many samples did you submit to the Dr. Ketchum's DNA study?
I think totally somewhere between 30 and 40, and then a lot of them didn't have the hair tags, of course, and then 11, after they reviewed them and vetted them, 11 were actually selected and tested in the study.
And did you have personal communication with Dr. Ketchum?
Yes, through you. Me and you had talked, and we'd come up with a way to get the hairs, and you'd ask, for me to, get the hairs to her, and gave me the address, and we did correspond once I started sending in hairs.
And have you communicated with her in the last 6 months?
Not in the last 6 months, no.
So after the returns were given to you about what the hair follicles contained, tell us what those results were.
Well, the mitochondrial DNA was human, which was a kind of a shocker, because Mr. Spence, who vetted the hair and compared it to the Sasquatch, other Sasquatch hair, of course, said it's just uniquely Sasquatch. And so I wasn't expecting it to be human. I was expecting it to be, some sort of weird or odd thing, maybe even a, prehistoric type of human. But it wasn't. It was modern human mitochondrial DNA.
And where did the DNA show that the origins of that were?
Interestingly, most of the when they did the haplogroups, which that's the same technology they use if you're doing a family history on yourself. Most of them came from the Middle East, Russia, and Western Europe. Not where it was expected. A lot of people expected they would be local. I think only 2 or 3 samples came back from Canada. The haplogroups were in Canada, but the majority were, from Europe.
So the study included saliva, tissue, hair, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And mitochondrial DNA comes from a hair follicle.
Mm-hmm.
And a nuclear DNA would come from
the nucleus.
Okay.
And you would need blood. You can't get nuclear DNA from a hair follicle. So in order to get the nuclear DNA, you're going to need flesh or blood.
And if you had nuclear, that would give you the paternal side.
That's correct. Give you the father.
And what did that return as?
Unknown. When they did the comparison to GenBank, they used what's called a blast search, a blast engine, which is a Google engine for the GenBank database, and it didn't match any of the sequences that were in GenBank. Unknown.
And GenBank contains all of the DNA that has been classified in the world.
That's correct, and submitted. And you'd have to look it up now. I think even since the study, it's even greater, and still no match.
How is that possible?
Well, the creatures came from somewhere else, and else is wide open for what else is, or it's unfortunately until this time, no one has been able to get a viable sample and get it into GenBank.
So I remember when we got those returns, several of the labs that did the testing were questioning whether it was some tribe from the Amazon.
Yeah. Or what was it? Yeah.
What was it?
Yeah, I know a lab in North Carolina went as far as basically they got curious because Dr. Ketchum basically would take the sample, send it to the lab, and send them the money. Say, I need you to run this test or that test and give me the results. It was totally blind, so they didn't know what they were getting. Well, in North Carolina, this particular lab, they got curious because they saw these results and they're like, this is odd, this is weird. So they did it. They blasted it themselves and couldn't find the organism in GenBank. Then they reached out to Melba and said, "What did you send us?" A little bit perturbed, and she said, "Oh, I sent you purported Sasquatch hair and other. I think flesh was involved as well." And they lost their minds. They went crazy. At first, they refused to release the samples and not give them back to Melba. And Melba had to go and hire an attorney and threaten to sue them because she'd already paid for the results. She got to give them to me. We paid for them. I contracted you to provide the service. And so they finally agreed, after the lawyers did a little talking back and forth, that they would release the results back to the study, but the study couldn't use the name of the lab. They had to remain anonymous. Can't say the word, anonymous. So they had to remain anonymous in order for the results to go into study. So that was like an independent verification, and they were very upset. Institutionally, they were very upset.
Why?
They didn't want their name and their lab being associated with Sasquatch. It was still in something, a lot of circles, still a career killer to say that I research Sasquatch or I'm, looking into that subject.
But we're using hardcore science.
I know that's the crazy thing. I think it's more of a dogma than it is, about science. It's more of a belief system, or than true science. If it's true science, that more universities and we were involved in a study that was $300,000-$400,000 maybe max, and that was all privately funded by individuals. Period. That study should have been done, by universities, millions of dollars, multiple years, with multiple locations. But it wasn't, and it isn't. To my knowledge, no one's really doing that.
But Scott, what if one of those researchers that is at that collegiate level had done a study and had done studies and they didn't like the results?
Well, like we've already seen, they just basically bury it. Shut up and be quiet about it.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot.
Okay, so we didn't use just one lab.
Nope.
Why don't you explain the quality of the lab we were using?
Yeah. So there was 13 labs were used, and these were labs like Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This was Texas A&M, University of Texas, UCLA was used, I believe. Crime Lab,
Northern
Louisiana Crime Lab was also used. And I think that's important to point out because the Crime Lab, is used to forensically test DNA, to put people in jail or put people on death row. So if, when people try to say, oh, your results were contaminated, oh, your results, were mishandled, then they're accusing a crime lab that Louisiana and many other states use to prosecute and put criminals behind bars. So I highly doubt that they got it wrong. And if they did get it wrong, it would seem to me that a defense attorney that's got a little brains would go say, hey, they were used in the DNA study and obviously they didn't know what they were doing. So, we got to throw out their results because, they contaminate the results. That hasn't happened. I've never heard of it. So I thought that was very odd that after using that lab, that no one ever has tried that tact in a court of law to try to throw out the evidence.
So years ago, a man named Ray Crow had a newsletter called The Track Record. I personally went through that for 17 years, and he had articles in there that talked about DNA from Bigfoot Sasquatch that came back human. And it was continually rebuffed And they said it couldn't be, and that obviously one of us had touched the sample and they'd gotten that return that way.
Mhm.
Why couldn't that be the case this time?
Well, to start off with, they knew that going in that it could possibly be one of the critics or criticisms of the study would be contamination. So they were very careful. And you can forensically wash hair during the process. So it doesn't matter who touches it. Even Dr. Sykes has a quote that you can forensically wash the hair and make it pristine, was his words, the word pristine. And so they processed it just like you would in a criminal lab. They washed the samples and they cut the hairs up and they went through the process. So there was no contamination going in. They also used, in some instances, they used robots. And after washing the hair, no human being touched it. They also had the DNA profiles of the lab workers. So if a DNA result had come back human and matched one of the lab workers, they would have known it was contaminated. So they took every measure they could to ensure it wasn't contaminated.
When I first found DNA in hair out of Hoopa, I tried to find a location that would test the hair. Called 30 or 40 different colleges and universities, and none of them wanted to be involved with anything related to Sasquatch DNA. And the only person I could find that was even remotely interested was Dr. Melba Ketchum, and she had been working with Josh Gates on a sample that he had. And when I sent her the hair, she got excited because she knew we had something special.
Yeah.
Now, the people nowadays are saying, well, if the study wasn't done by a university or a college, then it should be ignored and not accepted.
Well, that's just their hyperbole. I mean, that's just, I don't know what the best way to say it, snobbish. Because, we did what I think is extremely, professional scientific work. I mean, we collected, we were trying to collect DNA samples and be involved in a study that had never been done before. We had to think outside the box, go collect these samples, and as best we could, forensically collect them and send them in. So, because I'm not a college professor, does it mean I can't collect a hair sample properly or, process it properly? And same thing with Dr. Ketchum. Her credentials are highly respected. I mean, she went to veterinary school, Texas A&M. She's no slouch in that area. And she also, was running one of the only DNA labs at the time in the country.
Wasn't it true that Dr. Ketchum did work for law enforcement?
Yes, she was an expert witness for the state of Texas. And she actually was involved in a case where her lab results convicted a murderer. And just to boil it down real quick, basically a boy that had a family was away at college. For whatever reason, he went crazy, lost his mind. He came home. Well, they had gotten a dog, and he'd never been around that dog. So he kills the entire family, kills the dog, and throws the dog in the back of his vehicle, drives back halfway back to college, and then buries the dog. Well, they find the dog. Well, they find these dog hairs in the back of the boy's car. And so they asked Dr. Ketchum to run the DNA, and she's able to run and match the DNA from the dog to the hairs that came out of the back of his car. And that convicted him of murder. And so they began to use her then, since that case, they were using her as an expert witness to, when they would find hair or blood or flesh to actually tie people to the crime scene.
Another thing that Dr. Ketchum did that I thought was brilliant that Dr. Sykes hadn't done was when we submitted hair samples, she sent those hair samples to a hair and fiber expert to vet them before it went on the DNA study. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, they had and I think you provided one of the samples from Hoopa that was the pristine sample, and you had complete chain of custody. You had an eyewitness watch a Sasquatch leave a hair sample and some blood. Law enforcement officer come on scene. The person say, "This is the hair it left," and they, got the evidence back and collected it. So you had the gold standard, and so you provide with that gold standard. Mr. Spence, who is a hair and fiber expert, was able. Number one, he had a Sasquatch hair to compare to, and he has this huge database of common known animals. So he would take the hair and compare it to make sure it wasn't any of the known animals, and he would compare it to the Sasquatch hair and say this one's good for testing. And the reason they did that, number one, is you don't want to test, muddy up the waters with wasting your time. And back then, the PCR
Tens of
tests
thousands of
were,
dollars.
I run $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. So and with limited funds, you couldn't run. Hey, if you weren't sure it was a Sasquatch hair, you weren't going to run it. It was, because you didn't have that kind of money. And so they vetted the hair, and he only submitted hairs that he was 100% sure was Sasquatch hair. So you weeded out dog, where Sykes, he just tested everything and didn't go through this vetting process, which is crazy. So he got all kinds of different hairs. The funny thing was, I think in that study, he had 2 hairs he couldn't identify. I think, and again, they wouldn't give mitochondrial results. I think those were probably real Sasquatch hairs that got through. But yeah, it's without vetting, the study would run out of money, to be honest with you, really quickly. But it also made it more accurate, and you knew you had, scientifically, forensically, a Sasquatch hair to test.
There've been some comments made in the past about, we just had a bunch of wealthy people that were throwing their money around and were willing to look into anything. But one of our biggest supporters, money-wise, was Wally Herschel. And he came from the biggest Bigfoot group in the world. And once he heard we had DNA, he moved over and started to support us. Is that true?
That's true, yes.
And on that hair level, how difficult is it to determine at a microscopic level a Bigfoot hair versus all other hair?
Well, Bigfoot hair is very unique.
You have a picture of it?
Yeah, sure. We'll scroll down here to it. As you can see here, the human hair is the outside is extremely smooth, and it's got kind of small. The scales are small. In the Sasquatch hair, you've got rough, scaly hair, and you can definitely tell the difference in the medulla of a human hair and the Sasquatch hair. So for an expert that's doing this daily, this is a walk in the park as far as picking these out.
So the Bigfoot hair almost looks like it has guards on it or scales.
Scales, yeah. Where the human hair really this is smooth. And
is that consistent in all Bigfoot hair?
Yes.
So it seems like anyone with minimal amount of training would be able to understand what a Bigfoot hair is.
I think so, yes.
So irrelevant of what part of the country the hair comes in, it's going to look like that.
Yep.
And the hair and fiber part of this, I got to impress everybody that this is really important, because it's part of that process of getting towards the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And if it never passed that first vetting, it never went to DNA.
It wasn't tested. So people who want to claim, the results show a dog or a cat or a horse, well, the hair from those animals were never tested to begin with. And everybody has to remember they use the normal person's ignorance of how the DNA works and how sequences are. I mean, all life on the planet is related. We all we share common sequences. So if you wanted to cherry pick and you wanted to fool people, or you wanted to hoodwink people, to use that word that the others have used to us, you would say, oh, look, here's a pig sequence. Well, guess what? You have that same sequence. I have that same sequence. I'm not a pig. You're not a pig. So, but they use the ignorance of the general public to fool them into thinking that, well, it's got to be contaminated. And this expert said there's a pig sequence in this sequence of the Sasquatch. No, it's a common sequence that we all share. We can get into, I don't want to get into percentages, but, we share, 80, 90%, similar DNA to many animals, but we're not, I'm not a horse, or I'm not a pig, or I'm not an ape. And I think, that was one of the things they used to fool people.
Now, I like to discuss both sides of the coin.
Sure.
the contrarian and the people that want to discount the study will say, well, what we have running around here is possibly Gigantopithecus. Tell us about that.
Well, number one, to actually form this creature they call Gigantopithecus, they have like a partial tooth and partial jawbone. Like we were talking the other day, I said that's like finding a bolt in the highway and said, look, this comes from Ford Fairlane. That's impossible. And this was supposed to be a large bipedal ape that was native, but they've never, as far as I know, there's not been any fossils of this bipedal ape found in North America. So how did it get here and have a viable population for many years? Because we find we were at a cave where they were finding fossils of all kinds of different animals, millions, hundreds of millions years old. And so, and these, from mastodons to, species of fish. And so, it kind of weird that you wouldn't have these fossils showing up from these. So I think that's the accepted narrative that the mainstream's allowing them to go with. Is hey, and that's what they're kind of focusing on. That's what they've got. That's all, it's got to be a bipedal ape, and this is our best candidate.
So their best candidate, there's zero factual evidence it was ever in North America. There's never been wild hair or wild ape hair or wild ape bones found in North America. And then in my presentations, I say, well, I wrote a book called Bigfoot, Wild Men, and Giants. And giants and giant bones have been found in the United States.
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying that those giant bones are Bigfoot because we don't have the DNA, but we don't know.
Yeah.
So where does the research go from here?
That's a good question. I think there needs to be, on the DNA side, there needs to be more analysis. There needs to be a comparison because I think we have some sort of species of giant, and it's a human hybrid. And what I think needs to happen is we need the Smithsonian or whoever's holding, from your book, basically if they would dig into a mound, find a giant skeleton, of course everybody calls the Smithsonian and says, hey, we got a skeleton. They rush in, yeah, thank you. They grab it, it disappears. No DNA, no nothing. And so for many years, it was, there was a campaign just to take the bones and then not do any other acknowledgement of the giants. And I think it's time that, we get those bones, we get that DNA, we do, we compare that with the Sasquatch DNA, we kind of move forward and see what's going on. So try to get the origin of that. And I think we need to be comparing the Sasquatch DNA to some of the other DNA found with the elongated skulls and some other, cryptids or unusual, because I know on the elongated skulls, the results are very similar to the Sasquatch genome results, which they have human mitochondrial DNA and unknown nuclear. And a comparison of that, I think, would be very interesting.
Why hasn't that been done?
That's the $1 million question. I always hear money. I always hear, oh, we need money. We got to have money to do the genomics, to do the analysis and all that. Sometimes I think they're just afraid of what they'll find. Because if all these things are related, that opens up, all kinds of possibilities. And origin of life, all questions. Are we alone in the universe? All these questions then come up, and I think a lot of people are uncomfortable asking those questions or finding out the answers.
So there's some researchers, and I've been in conferences with them even saying this publicly, that said that they've been researching Bigfoot for 20 or 30 years and they've never seen, read, or heard anything paranormal related to that topic.
I find that hard to believe. I was in Bigfoot research and a novice, obviously a novice, just learning as I went. And within 2 years, I started having paranormal activity around me and around my house. They followed me home. I had orbs flying around me on my back deck. I had, was seeing the Sasquatch do things that you would consider paranormal, like doing the cloaking thing, disappearing. Feeling something walking right by you, but invisible. I mean, you physically knew something had just brushed by you, but there was nothing there. So I find that hard to believe. It's my opinion that if you really are serious about Sasquatch research and you do it and earnestly do it for 2 or 3 years, you're going to run into this, the paranormal thing. You know, I mean, UFOs also show up. It's you know, it's almost like the gateway drug to the paranormal. And so, you know, I had issues with seeing UFOs in the sky, and then did some video captures with some very uh, what would you say, ET looking creatures nearby with a Sasquatch in the same frame. So, you know, that relationship, I had a ghost hunter, was her team was ghost hunting at a local cemetery, and a Sasquatch showed up and started screaming at them and scared them to death and run them off. So, you know, you know, it all begins to open up. And so there's a relationship, I think, between all these different uh, cryptids and all these genres that a lot of people are uncomfortable with because they kind of all start coming back to being related.
So, do you think Bigfoot, Sasquatch is a multi-dimensional entity?
It could possibly be. I'm about 99.9% sure that it has the ability to use the portals, has the ability to like I said, cloak and or go into things like go into rock walls, do things like that that defy our laws of physics. They're able to like shift into our dimension and then shift out of our dimension. And I don't think 100% of them. I think it's a genetic thing, but I think there's a percentage of them that have those abilities.
So, in your video that you captured in the park, when you're walking down the trail and behind you, it appears like a Sasquatch appears out of nothing.
hmm
How do you explain that?
Well, you know, if you watch the video, you can see this. It looks like a portal or some sort of. It looks like a big ball of water, and it actually has an event horizon, and this creature, the Sasquatch, is in it. And he starts off, when I first go by, you know, he starts off kind of shimmering, like he's materializing, and then it just as I get further away, it gets clearer and clearer and more consistent. You know, it manifests more in you know, our dimension, if you want to call it that. But and as I get further away, the event horizon gets very distinct, and it looks like you're looking into a big ball of water. You know, you know, it's like if he jumped in a swimming pool and you were looking, you know, in at him, the distortion of the water. So my opinion, it's some sort of portal opened. He was coming through it or looking through it.
So, in my missing 411 research, what startled me is when we went to this location, you got boulders on one side and you got water on the other
Yeah.
that are about 8 feet apart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right in between those two locations, all this manifests itself.
Yeah.
And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think anyone's ever caught anything like that.
Yeah.
Have you?
I've never known anybody to catch a live portal in operation. Yeah, I think I was very fortunate. I was using the back trail technology, which, you know, that I got onto when I realized that you really can't get the Sasquatch from the front. They're peekers, and they're smart, so they're going to let you go by, and then they're going to look out. And so, you know, I developed a method of using a camera that, you know, shot behind me. So I really don't know what's going on, and I actually on purpose keep my head forward. And so this is how I caught that. So, you know, technically whatever did this and why it did it was thinking, well, he's not looking now. I'm going to manifest, or I'm going to come through the portal and take a look. And so,
Now, I'm going to guess a quarter mile from there, you and I
mhm.
were up on that trail several years ago, coming back, stopped on a ridge, just talking, and you got your camera rolling.
Yeah,
And you captured something pretty interesting.
yeah,
Could you play that for us?
sure. So here's the vocal from the video. I've amplified it a little bit where it's a little easier to hear. Play it one more time. Strange. I remember it scared me because I didn't know what was in there, and you're like, Scott, that's a Sasquatch. I'm like, you sure it's not a bear? And you're like, no, you know, because I was freaked out. I've never had a vocalization like that happen to me in research ever. And this was the first time. And so I was kind of taken aback.
How many times have you gone in there?
Oh, hundreds, hundreds.
And it happened when you and I.
Yeah, when you and I are together, it's, and you come here and visit and we do our thing, it's, you're the good luck charm. You're the rabbit's foot.
So we submitted this to Scott Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
And what did he find?
Well, he came back with an analysis, and let me look.
Just so everyone knows, Scott worked in the Navy. He was a cryptolinguist specialist who deciphered language. And I think Scott speaks 7 different languages. And he is the one who analyzed the Sierra sounds and determined that that was a language.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, so Scott transcribed it, and he says transcribers note clearly these utterances are produced with the same vocal apparatus as a human, but with resonance and tonal qualities beyond human, such as those evident in the Barry Moorhead tapes. There are at least 2 creatures producing utterance here, being that the first conversation turn overlaps. The witness reported that at the time of the recording, they thought the utterances sounded like playful teenagers. However, there seems to be more alarm in the voices than playfulness, which I find his comments very interesting.
I think they're right on key.
Yeah. I think, my opinion, they were having an argument about what to do with us, because I was a known, quantity. I'd been going up that trail by that time close to 100 times. That's the first time you'd ever been in there.
Right.
And so I'm there with you. And I think there was some sort of disagreement or some sort of discussion that got loud, just like we are. They got loud with it, trying to figure out what they were going to do about us.
So we disturbed them.
I think so. Or I think they were watching, and because they have lookouts and they watch that trail. And I'm thinking they weren't expecting you. You were the catalyst. You were the odd man out, so to speak. They're like, oh, wait a minute. Who's this? What's he doing with this person? We don't see him here with this guy. And I think that was that. In my opinion, that's kind of the reaction we got from them. And then they're trying to figure out what their course of action is.
How common is it for other researchers to get something like this?
It's not common at all. I don't know a handful of people that have gotten close, this sort. You get the hollers and you get the far off moans and roars and stuff like that. But as far as close up and the actual, I think the Moorhead stuff was really, the only other thing I can think of. I mean, there may be someone else out there that has, short snippets, but this is, it's very rare to get them speaking or, uttering anything other than a whoop or a growl.
So speaking of the Moorhead tapes, Sierra sounds, those were recorded in the Sierra. I spent time with Ron at that location. We filmed in that location in Missing 411 The Hunted. And Ron explained that he's heard these sounds and found giant tracks like you have found.
Mm-hmm.
And that in his camp, he's also had UAPs, UFOs, orbs fly through there. So the correlation between the Bigfoot Sasquatch and the orbs seems to be there, and you have found it here.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I've not had an orb in the woods, but I've had them here at the house, which is very unusual. And, I had an instance where I was just relaxing on the back porch, felt a presence, like something had come here, got my phone out. I'd been in the research. I knew, oops, something's going on, hair up on the back of my neck. The motion sensor light's going off and on, and it's still daylight. So, it's weird phenomenon. So I just pull out my camera and do a 360, and the camera caught a white orb, actually caught 3 white orbs. And in one frame, you've got them going different directions. And then with the UAPs.
Do you have that footage?
Yes, I have those pictures.
So getting back to the orb topic, doesn't Great Smoky Mountain National Park have a history of orb sightings?
Yeah, they actually have a place that people actually go. It's a pull-off, and people can watch across the valley to a remote mountaintop. And actually, it's just a thing people do, like on a weekend. Sometimes the lights show up, sometimes they don't, but they call it the light show. And people can watch orbs just float through the tree line, on the other side of the mountain. So it's very odd, but
It's
it's a reoccurring thing. They do it, every year.
same set of mountains that Bigfoot's in.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, I go back to how can researchers ignore the correlation between the two topics?
In my opinion, I think there comes every researcher that's really serious comes to that point, and they have to make a decision. I mean, they start seeing the supernatural stuff, paranormal stuff, whatever you want to call it, and then they have to make a decision. Do I continue down that road and investigate what I'm seeing, or is this just too much and they ignore it? And you have some that just that's it, that's the block. In other words, from then on, they're just staying with anything physical. That's all they're going to deal with. They're going to deal with footprints, they're going to deal with hair, vocalizations, that sort of thing, trying to get a picture of it or whatever. But they totally ignore if anything supernatural, anything paranormal happens. A cloaking incident, footprint showing up in their backyard, a single pristine footprint, with no egress or ingress. It's there, and weird stuff like that. UFO phenomena start happening around their house. Poltergeist activity inside their house or around people they love. Sometimes it's the people that get affected or the family members, and they choose to ignore it. And so that kind of like blunts that's where in my opinion, that's when you get the 8 people. That's where as far as they're willing to go.
Well, your point about finding tracks and there's a start point, there's an end point, but you can't follow the tracks to see where they came from.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen this before. I've seen it before in Colorado during a light snowstorm, and tracks suddenly appear at one location, suddenly stop in another location. There's no place to get off where they go and where they come from.
Yeah.
And you brought up the point about one track. That seems to be a very common occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you took a track and a plaster cast
Mm-hmm.
near the location where this Bigfoot emanated from what appeared to be a portal. Is that true?
Yes.
Do you have it?
Yes. You like to see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. So this was probably 4 or 5 years later in November. I went out the trail. There was no footprint, nothing there. And as I was coming back out, I noticed it looked like there was a set of 2. There was a push off, looked like from a left foot, and like it was leaping, and then there was a slide where it landed and it actually sprayed its toes. And then moss and the foliage was disturbed where it looked like it actually grabbed a tree with its hand and slung itself off the trail. And this is the footprint here. It's about 17, 18 inches long. And
Very, very flat.
yeah, very flat. The flat foot, the ground, what's amazing is the ground, you've been to that place, the ground is packed hard. It was an old roadbed, so it's packed gravel. See, it's almost like asphalt. And this thing skidded and dug out. Yet what was amazing to me, there was no flesh, there was no skin, there was no blood. If I'd have jumped and slid like that on gravel, and you can even see some of the gravel, still picked up in this cast. I'd have cut my foot all to pieces. This creature, his foot was well padded, and he didn't leave anything behind because I was sure wanting to find some. But yeah, he sprayed those toes out. It was pretty amazing.
So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, and is this the 5th over here?
Yeah, right there's the pinky toe.
Okay. What'd you think when you found this?
I was shocked because it's literally less than a quarter mile from the parking lot, and it's just out in the open. There was other people walking by ignoring it. I couldn't believe it, and I didn't have plaster at the time, so it was a Saturday that this happened, and it was probably late in the evening, and so I went home. Of course, it got dark, so I waited the next morning, first light, and went back, and thank God no one had walked through it and was able to get it. But it was what was amazing to me. It was out in the open. It was on the side of a main trail with a lot of traffic. So the Sasquatch was actually watching people, maybe even was following somebody, and then had a situation where he had to get out of the roadbed really quick. But it was amazing. I thought they sending me a sign or we're just watching people. Sometimes you wonder, was that for me? Because the place it was, there were like this one place. It's it's where the portal was. You get the footprint. I've got other videos and other captures right in this area. So it's just like it's just things don't happen in a vacuum. There's a lot of
We caught
things that are.
something else there
Oh
yesterday.
yeah, we did. We were using a electromagnetic meter, which I'd started using because a lot of people were postulating, when they zap your cameras or they zap you, they're using some sort of electromagnetic field or force, infrasound to create it. So I'd bought just a cheap, I'd say cheap, it's just an inexpensive meter. And it's accurate. I've went around the house and made sure, TV, the microwave stuff hits, and it's accurate. So I had actually, the funny story is, I thought I'd forgot it, and so you guys had gone to film a size comparison of 30, 40 feet away, and oh, there it is, the backpack. I'd taken my backpack off. I reach down, turn it on, and look at it. It's reading 3 or 4. Everything's cool. And I set it down to get ready to put my backpack back on, and when I do, and I holler, "Hey, I've got my meter." Bing, it starts going off, and it goes up to, I believe, the first time around 40. So there, that means, and it's alarming because that is a level that's dangerous for human beings to be around for long-term exposure. And I was just flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it, and it was just in that one area. And thankfully, you guys got filmed it, and we had more than one that incident, but it went on and off twice. And then we walked away from the area, walked back, and it wasn't there anymore. So something was bombarding that area where I was standing with some sort of EMF field.
It went up over 90 at one point.
At one point, it went up to 90. That's right, the second time.
So on the cast issue, how many times have you seen this flat foot kind of?
On all the ones I've found. Unfortunately, living here in East Tennessee, it's very difficult in the forest floor to get a really pristine print. Usually you get an impression.
Yeah.
And in the leaves. But I have been fortunate, every now and then they'll do that thing where they'll leave a single footprint. And they've always been flat. When they left a footprint in my backyard, and it's a large flat foot. There's no, in other words, the print was made in dust, but there is no arch. It's solid. The print itself, in other words, the foot was pressed flat to make the footprint. And the ones that I found, I've got pictures, I was too far back and couldn't cast them. And they're always flat feet.
Why one track?
Good question. I think number one, for me or you, when they leave it for a person, I think it's a signature. I think it's a notification. Hey, I was here. They want you to know they were here. It's a calling card. Now, in the wilderness, a theory that my daughter had dating a medic that was embedded with special forces. He was a corpsman, and he went hiking. I was talking about that. Oh, here's where I found that single footprint. It was weird because he had to know this was muddy and he could leave a footprint. And the guy just calmly looked at me. He says, "Oh," he said, "that we used to do that all the time." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, if we were like behind enemy lines and walking on like a trail or something that was known, what we would do, of course, we would walk where we wouldn't leave footprints, but there might be other people's footprints. And, we know what we're wearing. And so we would say, okay, we're going to be hiding somewhere off this trail. So when you see my boot print, then will be one single boot print. It'll be facing north or whatever direction you say you're going to face it. Then you go 50 yards and there's going to be a stick or a rock on the right side of the trail. We're 300 yards to the left. And I was like, oh, so, and I'm kind of buying his theory that possibly they're doing is they're leaving signals for other Sasquatch. Hey, this is the way I went. And it's a predetermined thing. They came up, who knows what their thing is. It could be a rock pile. It could be a stick. It could be a certain tree. We don't know. But it's a way to leave others a signal. This is the direction I went, or I came through here. So I think it serves both purposes, especially when someone finds it at their home or finds it in the trail right in front of them. Like I found, like I went out and came back here, there it is. And I've heard many people talk about that. Like they'll go out a trail and then come back and they'll find that footprint.
So one of the things that, before we close out the section on the footprints, I'll leave one thing for the audience to know is that I learned long ago when I was looking for tracks and things to always carry hairspray. And when you're in soft dirt or even some sand that will hold a print, You spray in the hairspray in the track, and it helps preserve it when you pour in the solution. So, one hint. So, just a summation of the DNA, mitochondrial DNA is maternal,
That's correct.
and that comes from hair.
Mhm.
And nuclear DNA comes from blood, tissue, and that's paternal. So that would be the father's side.
Father's side.
And in GenBank, at the time we did this, there were 152 billion base pairs. And when they took our results and they looked at GenBank, they could not find the paternal or the father's side of that DNA anywhere in the world.
That's correct. It was a totally unknown creature. They had DNA from 3 different locations in the United States, but they each matched each other, and they were collected at different times, and different locations, but yet they matched like they were related. So I thought that was very interesting. If you've got contamination, it's kind of hard to fake contamination over a period of several years.
Well, one important point that I bring up at conferences is when they say, well, if the sample's contaminated with human DNA, then the result that they would get, example, if I contaminated it, they would have my DNA.
Yeah.
But they don't get that.
No.
And there is the difference.
Yeah. There's the difference.
So when we started the DNA project, it was important to get our results reviewed by a journal.
Sure.
And Dr. Ketchum was working with a journal.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that?
Sure. Well, she went to the journal Nature to submit the study for peer review. And what people got to understand is journal Nature accepted it, which is a big deal. Just getting accepted is a huge deal. I mean, here in my notes, you can see here that on average, 14,000 papers from 13 countries are submitted to the journal Nature each year for peer review. And out of that, they only select 7.4% of the papers to even review. So the fact that she got, the journal Nature to accept the paper and review it is a huge deal. That means they took it seriously. If it's bunk, if it's garbage, if it's if it's all made up, then why did they take it? And even further point is after they took it, they reviewed it, and they gave her a chance to submit corrections. In the review world, in this world of publishing papers, they can review a paper and they can like it, but they can ask for changes. They can ask for a second submission. So they sent it back to her with a list of things. Hey, make these changes and resubmit it. We want to see it again.
Okay. So we're talking about a white paper.
Yes.
Now that wasn't written just by Dr. Ketchum.
That's correct. There was several other authors, all experts in their field.
Weren't there 5 PhDs?
5 PhDs, yes.
And they were all top-notch in their field.
That's correct.
So this was a cumulative effort of several scientists coming together.
That's correct.
To explain their findings and submit it to the journal.
That's correct.
Good.
Yeah, they basically they wrote it together. Each person did their specialty. So the microscopy person did that. The person, the hair sample and fiber guy did his part. You had a pathologist do his part when they had the flesh samples. So everybody did their part, wrote their part of the paper, and then it basically was put together. As the primary author, and Dr. Ketchum, organized the paper together, and wrote the intro and the conclusion, and then provided all the documentation and all the supporting evidence, and then packaged that together and gave that to Journal Nature. So it wasn't just it was not just Melba or Dr. Ketchum doing her own thing. This was a collaborative effort, and like I said, these guys all signed on. They all did their part.
And they all agreed.
They all agreed.
And what happened?
Well, unfortunately, Journal Nature, after the second submission, one of the interesting things was that they asked her to remove any negative evidence, anything that was a negative. In other words, some of the big things in the paper was it's not what was in the DNA, but what was missing. What was missing really, drove the point home that we have a human hybrid. We have a non-human creature. On the nuclear side especially, there's DNA sequences, there were DNA abnormal. I can't say the word abnormality. There was abnormal DNA that that when other scientists would look at it, they're like, whatever this is, it can't be alive. These sequences have to be there for a human being like me or you to gestate and live. But yet, you got this hair, you got this sample from a hair or a piece of flesh of a thing that was living. And yet, when we look at it from a DNA point, that's impossible. This shouldn't even be breathing. This is impossible. How can it even be alive? So what was very curious is the reviewers that they wanted all that stripped out. So she did strip it out. She took all that out and then added what they wanted her to add in and resubmitted it. So we actually have, they give you a submission number and you can go back and look it up. We have those numbers. And so she resubmitted it, and then mysteriously, without any fanfare, without anything, she receives an email in October of 2012 saying, paper denied. No reason, no nothing. No comment from the referees, the guys looking at the study, nothing. Just killed it.
What do you think?
Well, I think, put on the tinfoil hat, no, I think that was a delaying tactic. I think they were, when you submit a paper, everybody has a gag order, and you can't talk about it no matter what's going on. And so why this thing was almost 18 months, was going on. You and I couldn't talk about it, but the critics went to town. And so, and unfortunately, there were leaks, and some of the leakers were the submitters. And they were leaking to well-known celebrities, as you know, that then, would put it out. And so the rumor mill started, and people were making all kinds of false claims against the paper. And we were sitting here with our hands tied. We couldn't say anything because the paper, if we would have said something in rebuttal, it could have it put the paper in jeopardy because they could have pulled the paper. And, you can't, there was too much at stake getting this published in the journal Nature to do that. So we just had to sit on our hands and let the critics go to town. And unfortunately, we couldn't answer them.
So, Scott, you and I are a couple of yahoos. We're nobody, no scientific background. Yeah, we've never submitted DNA before. And yet we and others were able to get Bigfoot DNA.
Yeah.
Why couldn't a university down the road, University of Tennessee, why couldn't University of Utah, why couldn't they take a project like this on?
I think they could. I just don't think they want to. I really do think they're afraid of the results. They don't want to know. I think that's it. They don't want to know, or they may already know. Who knows? They may have already been a study done, and when they got the results back and they came back with human hybrid, where it's a worldview or a political thing or a narrative thing, whatever it is, they're like, oh no, we don't want to make this public, or we don't want to deal with this, so we're just going to squash it.
So there are unbelievable parallels between the Bigfoot research and UFO research.
Mm-hmm.
Government denies on the UFO end. And when I've submitted Freedom of Information Act requests against the Park Service, the Forest Service for information about Sasquatch reporting, they have nothing and they deny. What's your experience been with agencies out here?
Well, I know that's not true. I mean, our local wildlife, Tennessee Wildlife Recreation Association, they're our game wardens. I have had people contact me via email and tell me that they've had a Sasquatch experience or an encounter, and they called Tennessee Wildlife to report it to get help, and they have referred them by name to me. So the local state authorities know they exist, and they're aware of me. So, from that standpoint, I know they're aware. I've talked off the record to a lady that was retired 40 years. She was a naturalist with the Park Service. And, and I broached her with the subject. It just came up. She had a footprint on the wall, a cast of it in her little shop. And we started up conversation, started talking. And she says, oh yeah. She said, many a time around the campfires, we'd have, staff staff meetings or outings or whatever, and that would be one of the subjects is to talk about all the weird stuff we've experienced. You know, whether it be Sasquatch, UFO, or anything else. She said, "Oh yeah, we experience it, but we're just not supposed to talk about it." She said if I remember correctly, her quote to me was basically, "The superiors don't want to know. If it happens, that's okay, or you get a report, that's okay. Just don't tell us." And so her upper management and on up to just didn't want to know about it.
Old quote I heard a long time ago. Our government won't acknowledge what they can't control.
Yeah. And I think that's true because I don't think they have a handle on any of this.
So one of the things we saw in your video was Bigfoot slowly appearing
Mm-hmm.
out of a portal, something. And others would say, well, maybe it's coming out of its cloaking.
Yeah.
And other people have talked about Bigfoot's ability to cloak.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. Me personally, I've actually eyewitnessed. I unfortunately don't have real good video of it, but I saw a Sasquatch in what you would call cloak mode, and it was shimmering. It was kind of weird, to be honest with you. You saw foliage moving, and you could hear it. And when you looked, it was a distortion, and this was a large distortion, you know, like a human shaped, about 8 or 9 feet tall. And it just real quickly just moved by me, and it was weird. And I've had other witnesses, people contact me talking about how they saw one and they like it was walking through the woods, and as they watched it walk, the lower half disappeared, but the upper half remained visible. And then I've had other people, it's happened to me before, but a friend out in Washington State was checking trail cameras, and he could hear it and feel it, and it literally this creature Sasquatch passed by him so close it almost brushed him, and he could feel the wind off of it. He could hear the leaves crunching, but there was nothing there. He couldn't see anything. But he said, you know, the presence was there. He was right behind him, and it just walked right by him. So you know, this cloaking thing, and we're trying to figure out how they do it, and it seems to be multiple forms, but they have the ability when they want to hide themselves. So this video here is of the Sasquatch that was back in the laurel thicket. This was early in my research. This was in the area where I put up all the trail cameras, and if you'll remember, that's in the area where you had your sighting. This is in that same area, and also the same area where I had the was getting the real good DNA off the tape. And so, you know, I go in, I'm getting ready to take the SD cards out and switch out. So I turn my back to this thicket, and I have to urinate. So as I'm urinating, I have the camera pointing behind me. And here's this guy here up here in the upper corner here, you can see.
Oh, yeah.
And as I start, you know, and it basically is just watching me the whole time. It's crazy.
Crazy.
You know, in the same area where we had everything yesterday. In fact, you know, we had our little snake incident there. We went up the hill there to show you, to kind of show the guys where this thing came out, and basically it was another one of these back trail incidents where it was just about dark, and I was going out, and on the back trail here beside this tree, you can see this guy leaning out and watching me. Kind of, he's one-eyeing me again. You know, they never look. Almost all of them, it's just one eye. And so it's got one eye and it's watching us. And you can see here in the detail when I blowed it up, it's got some pretty messed up teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one, Dave's probably one of my best, and happened around 2012, and it's on a back trail. Unfortunately, I didn't have a gimbal or anything. I literally just had it hard strapped. But I'm walking out, had gone on top, and had spent a couple hours, and we were on our way out. Me and my son were walking out, and as my shoulders are swinging back and forth, you can see here this Sasquatch. It comes up to this bunch of bushes, and it's like it's caught. It sees it, it knows I'm what, oops, he's got a camera, and as you see it go down. And it's probably one of my best captures because you can actually see the movement, you can see the face, and you can see it as it dunks down.
I think some people would relate that to almost a Yeti type.
Yeah, it's white. In this area, there are actually several white Sasquatches. I have more than one video and some still captures of more than one white Sasquatch. And I have friends that have eyewitnesses to these. So this area seems to have a lot of white Sasquatches in it.
So, Scott, one of the things that we found is that there seems to be relevance to Bigfoot sightings in Native American areas. And I've traveled the country, I've seen this time after time at reservations. Now, as I understand it, this is an area where in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park that the Cherokees had resided.
That is correct. Actually, in the Tellico area, where I do a lot of had done a lot of research, there's that area is called Chota, and that is was the capital of the Cherokee Nation. So that whole valley, and literally I was researching in a suburb of Chota. It's crazy. That whole river valley had about, I think, a survey in the 1700s. They came over. They said there was about 10,000 braves. So that would at least be 30,000 if everybody just had one children. So that's quite a large population of Cherokee. And of course, the Smoky Mountains, we were actually talking to someone talking about all the excavations. Anytime you build a road going through towns and around the mountains in a river valley, they find a village. So they were all in this area. Kate's Cove was a big hunting grounds for them, and that's part of my research area as well.
They must have had a name for Bigfoot.
Yeah, they have Chattacoola is one of them. And
Chattacoola.
Chattacoola, and I believe that's slanted rock, a slanted head devil.
Great. So one of the correlations that I found is the association between Bigfoot and UAPs, UFOs. Just on a wild guess, there's got to be some association between Bigfoot and aliens.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I actually had an encounter with a Sasquatch where there was an alien peeking around a tree, and I actually have the Sasquatch and the alien, or the alien-looking being. It looks like a gray peeking around a tree in the same frame. It started to rain, and then I started getting an invitation to leave. And what I mean by that is they began stomping the ground and grunting, and they were grunting and behind me and on both sides, except for the way out. It was obvious it was time to leave. So I'm nervously spinning around, and I'm trying to narrate and trying to make some sort of video about it. And as I'm spinning around, I capture this Sasquatch kind of gets caught in the open in a profile. So he just freezes. And then behind him to the right, you see this really crazy looking ET like creature peeking out at the tree. So you've got the Sasquatch and you've got this ET creature at the same place at the same time.
You have a picture?
Yeah.
Can I see it?
Yeah, sure. Look at this. This is like, it's crazy. You can see that here's the Sasquatch here, and over here is that ET looking thing.
It's a pretty clear picture.
Yeah, it's crazy.
What'd you think when you got that?
I was pretty shocked. There's inklings that there's relationships to this stuff because started seeing UFOs when I'd never seen UFOs before, around the house, but the rare instant. But this instance where I actually, it actually captured it. It was pretty creepy.
So I wonder what the relationship is between the two.
Well, I mean, in my research, when I did research for my book, there's an author that, wrote a whole book about the relationship between ET and Bigfoot sightings. I think about 25% on both sides, relate the other. So, 25% of the Bigfoot encounters have a UFO in it or around it. And same thing with the UFOs. A Bigfoot shows up, like a UFO lands, and a Bigfoot, the witness sees the UFO, the Bigfoot jump off the UFO, run into the woods.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy looking.